Hi, I'm David, and today I want to give you something to think about. My Bible study today comes from over in John chapter 13. It's verses 1 through 17. It concerns one of the events that happened on the night that Jesus was betrayed. Now, on that night, Jesus celebrated the Passover with his disciples. Now, it wasn't truly the Passover because, honestly, the very next afternoon, which was the day of preparation for the Jews for the feast, Jesus was going to be crucified, and he was going to take the Passover along with all the ordinances under the Old Covenant out of the way. He was going to fulfill the entire Old Covenant. And so this wasn't really truly what you would consider the Passover, but they did the same things that they would ordinarily do on a Passover, only they did it a night early because Jesus Christ was about to become our Passover, as Paul speaks of in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7. And so on this night, Jesus and his 12 disciples, they dined in the upper room. But then after the meal was finished, Jesus did something that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Jesus got up, left the table, began to take off his outer clothing. He girded himself with a towel. He got a basin of water. He came back to the disciples and he began to wash each and every one of their dirty feet. This was the type of job that if you entered into the house of a wealthy man, that you would see the least of his servants would do this. This was usually a job that was performed by maybe an older servant who really couldn't do a whole lot of menial labor anymore. Their role was usually just to greet the guests and to wash their feet and make them comfortable and seat them and things like that. And so here Jesus is literally lowering himself, humbling himself to the point of where he is like the least of all servants, doing a job that nobody really wants to do, and that's wash someone else's dirty feet. Now, why does Jesus do this? Well, the best explanation is that there was an event that happened while Jesus and the 12 were traveling to Jerusalem. In fact, you can read about it in Matthew chapter 20. And that is that the disciples, having heard Jesus tell them for the third time in the space of about a week that he was going to Jerusalem, and there he was going to be arrested, he was going to be tried, he was going to be turned over to the Gentiles, and then they were going to crucify him. So he was going to be dead. And so I suspect that one or two of them got the notion in their heads that, well, if Jesus is going away, if he's going to be gone out of the picture, then one of us is going to have to become the leader of this group. And so they argued among themselves on the way to Jerusalem about which one of them was going to take the Lord's place. And so the washing of the disciples' feet is meant to be a lesson to them that the true measure of a leader is not so much being the head of the group, but rather instead it's about serving the needs of others. And so Jesus begins to go around the room washing each one of these 12 men's dirty feet. Now, there were two disciples in this room that were guaranteed to give the Lord a pretty uncomfortable experience. And the first one you probably readily think about, and that was Simon Peter. Simon Peter was always throwing up obstacles that the Lord had to tear down. And tonight was no exception. As Jesus got closer to Peter, Peter exclaimed, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" He can't believe this is going to happen. And Jesus proceeds to explain to him, saying, "Simon, I know you don't understand this right now, but when I'm finished, you will understand it," okay? And then Peter cuts him off at the pass and says this, "Lord, you will never wash my feet." And Jesus puts a serious look on his face and says bluntly, "Unless I wash you, you have no part in me." In other words, if I don't do this, you're not one of mine. And of course, Peter, given to extremes, goes to the opposite direction. And he says, Lord, wash not only my feet, but also my face and my hands. And Jesus tells him, look, you're clean. You've had a bath. All you need is your feet cleaned. And he proceeds to wash Simon Peter's feet. Obviously, the lesson here is probably beginning to sink in. It's not about being great, but it's about serving. But there was another disciple, too, that posed an uncomfortable situation as well, and that was probably Judas Iscariot, because Judas was still in the room, okay? And yes, the Lord did wash his feet. John doesn't tell us how that turned out. I suspect it was a little bit more uncomfortable for Judas than it was for Jesus, because Jesus understood that, well, there had to be a traitor, and this was the traitor. And so Jesus simply loved him just as he ordinarily would have loved anyone else, and did to him what he did to everyone else in the group. That's the type of thing that only Jesus can do. And so this weekend, as you observe the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, I hope you'll think about your service and how you view greatness. If you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, then serve others in the kingdom of heaven. That's what this lesson was all about. It was about the fact that true leadership requires serving others. I'm David. I hope you have a wonderful Resurrection Day, and I hope I've given you something to think about.